You're watching France 24, and we've just been listening to Brice Robin, who is the head prosecutor, the head investigator into the crash of the Germanwings plane just 48 hours ago, giving what can only be described as a truly chilling press conference, telling us that the co-pilot is suspected of deliberately crashing that plane, naming that co-pilot 28-year-old Andreas Lubitz, a German national, saying that he seemed relatively calm, according to what they could hear on the voice recorder. They're just hearing breathing as the plane went down in its final moments, hearing a few screams at the end from the passengers on the plane, hearing the main pilot hammering on the door outside, but saying that death was instantaneous at the end for those 150 people on board. James Andre, you were listening to that with me. It's really an incredible story. Let's start with the details that Brice Robin gave us. What struck you the most?
Well, what struck me the most is that, basically the main information here is that it is deliberate, which we kind of knew slightly prior to this press conference, because it was quite obvious that it was impossible for this door to be blocked by anybody else than this co-pilot. The other important piece of information is the fact that it was the co-pilot, because until now we didn't know which one of the two pilots on board that plane had left the cockpit before this crash took place. And well, now the big question is the motive. I mean, is this a suicide? Is this, a terrorist attack? It's still completely unclear, but it is indeed a chilling chain of events, and it's now quite clear how it happened. I mean, it's also very clear that this was deliberate, because, as indeed the prosecutor said, in order to decide what altitude you fly these planes, you have to turn this big knob many times in order to get such a descent. So that does show that it was clearly done on purpose. And also the breathing, he also says that nothing was said in that cockpit after the pilot, the first pilot left, that the breathing remained normal till the end, which is quite incredible when you think about it.
James, it's been just 48 hours since, a little bit more, maybe 50 hours now, since that crash happened. 2 days. Almost immediately, many of the French leaders ruled out any link to terrorism. Here again, we heard the prosecutor saying that he also ruled out this link to terrorism. Why were they, first of all, the leaders so quick to rule it out in the beginning? And what makes the prosecutor say there is no link now?
Well, there's probably a bit of wishful thinking in a way, for starters, but there's also the fact that there was no chatter on social networks, because usually, I was talking about this with Wassim Nasser, that if you're accustomed to watching France 24, you know very well, but he was telling me that usually in these kind of cases, when something big like this is going to be claimed, well, you get a lot of chatter on Twitter, Facebook, on various equivalent social media, and this has not been the case. Now, you've also got to remember that given the structure of some terrorist organizations, if we're talking, for example, about the Islamic State, well, they do have like these lone wolf kind of operatives who will commit will commit terrorist acts that have not been planned or decided by the organization itself. And in this case, well, the organization can also take some time in order to study what has happened and to decide whether or not they will claim it, which could explain that there is no chatter, and maybe there will be a claim in 2 or 3 days, which would, of course, answer that question. But the fact of the matter is, the fact that there is nothing going on social networks does point to the fact that this probably, might not be, because once again, you can't rule it out for now. I mean, it's impossible to say that it wasn't a terrorist attack, but it's for the moment, there's still nothing going on those social networks, which makes you think that, well, it doesn't seem that it is going to be claimed. But once again, when there was the hostage situation in Australia, it was claimed several days after the attack.
The identities of both of the pilots weren't released or hadn't been released until we've just got some information now. Tell us a bit more about what we know about this particular co-pilot, who is now, for all intents and purposes, being accused of deliberately crashing that plane with 150 people on board.
Well, we don't know that much. What we know, of course, now is his name, Andreas Lubitz. We know that he's 28. We know that he'd flown about 630 hours. We know that he was hired by Lufthansa as he came came out of his training in 2013, or that at least is what you can find in the press, notably the German press, at the moment. And that's very much it for the time being. The other information, which is quite interesting, which was given during this press conference, is the fact that the families of both the pilot and the co-pilot are on location, being kept separate from the other families. Now, the reason why we didn't know the name beforehand, before now, kind of makes sense because, of course, it's an investigation. Nobody knew if it was a technical problem. Nobody knew what had happened. So, of course, they were not going to disclose the names, neither of the pilot or the co-pilot earlier, because, you could have... First, the investigation is ongoing, so you can be sure that policemen have already spoken to the families of both the pilot and the co-pilot, including friends, relatives, etc., in order to profile them. That's probably been done already. And then the other thing is, of course, you don't want acts of retaliation, for example, from family members of victims who would like to take revenge, or you never know what can happen. Mm-hmm. So this is why you do not disclose the identities of these people at early stages of investigation. But today, obviously, the prosecutor decided to give that name.
James, 28 years old, some 600 hours of flight time for this co-pilot who again has been named as Andreas Lubitz. Is that surprising? That seems young to me, but I'm not a specialist.
No, it's not surprising. It's normal practice. Basically, when a pilot is trained, he starts off as a co-pilot. And so this was... If you wish, he was still in a training phase. If you like, you'll be the second pilot of a plane like the A320 for years before you eventually become the commander of that plane. But all that is part of the curriculum. It doesn't appear particularly surprising.